As many of you know by now, Windows 10 support has ended as of October 14th, 2025, and many computers are stuck on this operating system thanks to Microsoft's stringent system requirements. Specifically, the requirement of 8th gen or newer Intel CPUs or 2nd gen or newer AMD Ryzen CPUs. While there are options to continue using Windows 10, including enrolling in ESUs or switching to the IoT Enterprise LTSC release, these are all ultimately temporary solutions, with consumer ESU support only giving until October 2026, and IoT Enterprise LTSC 2021 being supported until January 2032. Microsoft's intended solution to this problem is for you to just throw out your perfectly usable computers and buy new ones, so they can also continue shoving more AI nonsense down your throat. However, with how much AI nonsense Microsoft continues to try to force on their users, many are jumping ship to various Linux distributions, and one of the most popular options has been Zorin OS. Zorin OS 18 happened to release on the same day Windows 10 reached end of life. Built on Ubuntu 24.04, Zorin OS has a very similar look and feel to Windows, designed to make the transition very nice for users who may be unfamiliar with Linux. Zorin OS comes in 3 versions, being the Pro version, which is a paid version of Zorin OS, the Core version, which is likely the version most people will want to go for, and the Education version, which is intended for schools and students with preloaded educational software. For most users, at least starting out, I would recommend the Core version. However, if you want to support the Zorin OS developers, you can pay for the Pro version if you would like. From here, we can just simply download, scroll down to Zorin OS 18 Core, and skip putting in an email. And from here, it starts downloading Zorin OS 18. With the ISO downloaded, we can begin our installation of Zorin OS 18. For demonstration purposes, I will be installing Zorin OS in a virtual machine. It should be noted that Zorin OS 18 Core requires minimum 2 GB of RAM and 15 GB of storage, with the Pro version requiring 40 GB of storage. We will choose the option to try or install Zorin OS. It is worth noting, if you are installing this on a computer with an NVIDIA GPU that was produced after 2013, you'll want to choose the modern NVIDIA graphics option instead. Here, we can choose to either try or install Zorin OS. We'll pick to install, and we'll choose our keyboard layout as usual. Here, we can download updates while installing Zorin OS, which will mean when your computer reboots, it should have all the latest updates that have been released since this ISO was created. You will also likely want to install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware, and additional media formats. You can also choose to participate in the census, which personally I will not do. This allows Zorin OS developers to see how many people are using the operating system. Now we can choose what to do when installing Zorin OS. Since there is no other operating system present in this VM, we won't have to do anything special. However, if you had a Windows installation already on your storage drive, you would have more steps to do. If we transition over to this live boot environment here, where there is a Windows 10 installation already present on the drive, we instead get notified that this PC currently has Windows Boot Manager on it. From here, we can choose one of three options. We can erase the disk and install Zorin OS, which is the same option that we would choose if there was no operating system present. We can do something else which will allow more advanced partition management on the drive, or the simplest option is to install Zorin OS alongside Windows Boot Manager. From here, we would then determine how much space on our drive we want to give to Windows right here, and how much space we want to give to Zorin OS. This will also permit you to choose which OS you will boot into from a grub boot menu. However, if a Windows update gets pushed, there is a risk that the update could break your boot menu, preventing you from accessing either operating system. Coming back to the previous screen, since we do not have a Windows installation present, we can just install Zorin OS very easily. We'll hit continue, then choose our time zone, which was already set correctly for me. Now we set the computer name, our username, and a password. And from there, we will now let Zorin OS install and perform any updates, which could take some time. With the installation done, we can now reboot. Upon reboot, we get the offer to take a tour, which we will deny. As you can see, Zorin OS does have a very nice layout, looking very similar to Windows, with a little menu in the bottom right, and the Zorin menu in the bottom left, looking very similar to a Windows 7 era start menu. Like many distros, you have everything you need to get started, including a web browser and an Office suite. LibreOffice is the default Office suite as per usual, with the layout in Zorin OS by default looking similar to the default layout used in modern versions of Microsoft Office. The web browser of choice is Brave, which is different than the default of Mozilla Firefox that is used in most other Linux distros by default. You can, of course, install a different web browser if you wish, such as Firefox or Google Chrome. For most software, you can download whatever you want to use from the Software Center pinned on the bottom taskbar. So, for example, if you wanted to install Firefox because you don't like Brave, we can easily search for it by typing in Mozilla Firefox, and we can install it as shown. One thing I will note is that if you have the option, I would generally avoid using the Flatpak option due to the excess amount of space that Flatpaks can use, and instead would use the native Zorin OS option. We can then launch it to properly install Firefox. And there we go. We have installed Mozilla Firefox. For other software, it may not be available through the Software Center, or the version you want is not available. For example, Google Chrome can only be downloaded as a Flatpak, but I want the regular version. So for this, we will instead turn to our web browser and go download Google Chrome like we would on Windows by searching for Google Chrome. We would then choose Download Chrome, and here we have to choose a file type, either 64-bit.deb, which is for Debian and Ubuntu-based distros, or 64-bit RPM for Fedora and OpenSUSE operating systems. Because Zorin OS is based on Ubuntu, anytime you have the choice, you will always want to download a .deb file, since .rpms will not work, being designed for other Linux operating systems. Once it downloads, we can run the file, which will open the Software Center again, only this time interfacing with the locally downloaded installation file. From here, we can install it like any other app from the Software Center. And there you go. We can open it up, and once we get past these screens, you will see Google Chrome is fully working like it would in Windows. Due to licensing, Microsoft Core fonts are not included by default in Zorin OS. This can cause issues with some Office documents and web pages, causing them to look wrong. However, it is possible to very quickly install all these fonts. For this, we will need to launch the terminal, something a normal user should not have to do often. To do that, we're going to open the Zorin menu, and we can simply search for the terminal. From here, we will enter the following commands. We will enter sudo apt update, entering our password when prompted. And then we will enter sudo apt install ttf ms core fonts -installer. We will hit Y to continue. Then on this page, we will need to hit the Tab key to highlight OK, and then press Enter to confirm. And then we need to press the left arrow key to highlight Yes, and Enter to accept the EULA license terms. Then enter the command sudo fc-cache -f-v, which will refresh the font cache. From here, you should now be able to interface with Microsoft Core fonts such as Arial and Times New Roman. To install the Aptos font, which has been the default font in Microsoft 365 since 2024, we will need to download it separately, as it is not included in the previous package. If we go to this page that I have linked in the description, and we scroll down, we can download the Microsoft Aptos font, picking the correct language for us, and it will download a zip file that we can now extract. From here, we can go through each font file and install it as needed. For that, we would just double click and then install. Although the idea of Linux is often to get away from proprietary Windows software, sometimes it is necessary to still use proprietary software. Zorin OS contains a built-in Windows app support layer that can be quickly installed from the Zorin menu right here. We go to install it, like so. With this installed, we can now try to install a Windows application. For demonstration purposes, I am going to try to install a C++ IDE that is Windows only. Now, I fully know that there are plenty of better solutions to programming than to use this specific IDE, specifically using an IDE that natively works on Linux. However, for demonstration purposes, I am just picking a piece of software that I know is Windows only. As you can see, this compatibility layer is running under Wine, so we need to wait for the configuration to be created. If we go about and try to install this, we can see everything seems to be working quite well. As you can see, it has installed totally fine, and now we can run it just like we would be able to run this IDE in Windows. At this point, I could even write C++ programs. However, I'm not going to do that right now, as I would much rather use a better IDE. It is worth noting that not every application will work with this compatibility layer, so it's always better to try to find a native Linux alternative when possible. The biggest challenge to many people who want to transition off Windows over to Linux is application compatibility. Notably, software like Microsoft Office and Microsoft 365 and the Adobe Creative Suite, including Photoshop and Premiere Pro, which people use every day, seem to have them on a stranglehold. Zorin OS has a great list of alternatives you can use in place of these applications, as well as many other Windows-only applications. For example, LibreOffice, which is pre-installed, is an excellent alternative to Microsoft Office. GIMP, or the GNU Image Manipulation Program, is an excellent piece of software for image editing and is a good alternative to Adobe Photoshop. And Kdenlive is a great alternative to Adobe Premiere Pro. My recommendation to anyone who is considering transitioning to Linux is to just give it a shot. Keep Windows around and do a dual boot so you can fall back to your Windows apps if needed, or if you find out Linux is not for you. Or have a USB ready so that you can reinstall Windows if you want to go all in with Linux as your only OS on your PC. You may find out that the alternatives to the big name apps like Adobe, Photoshop, and Premiere, and Microsoft Office work perfectly well for your needs, and many options you can use are fully free to use and open source as well. And on that note, that will wrap up our Zorin OS 18 demo video. Thank you for watching, and if you have any other videos you want to see, let me know in the comments.